So my name is Patricia Lewis. I am the Research Director here for International Security. And it's our great honor, privilege, to welcome all of you here. We have been working with the Internet Society to help them in their pathway of their anniversary program for their 25th year. And I was just thinking that it was in 1932 that Huxley published Brave New World, and it was 1992 that the Internet Society was formed. And here we are 25 years on from there. And if you think about the way in which we're starting to understand the way in which the internet affects our societies, going back to Huxley is not a bad idea. And so we're really pleased to be able to co-host this. And as you see, we're so joined up that Kathy and I had a wardrobe consultation. Our wardrobes talk to each other through the Internet of Things. There are sensors that transmit information that then are, I don't know about your chip in your brain, Kathy, but mine was telling me wear red today. So they're colluding against us. But anyone here who's not wearing a red jacket, you're just not with the program. So, and we thank you, because obviously we wanted to be a little bit separate and different. So we've got a really interesting afternoon here. We have opening remarks by Erik Huizer, which I'm sure I've just mispronounced, but I'm doing my very best, who is the Chief Technology Officer of SURFnet, Research Associate of University of Utrecht, and an Internet Hall of Fame inductee. Kathy will be chairing that, and then the panel, in which we have our illustrious panel here talking about the theme of the day. So this event is being recorded, and it's on the record, and it's being video streamed. So when we go into the question and answers, be aware that you will be heard by people online. It is not, I'm sorry to say, under the Chatham House rule. We do meetings under the Chatham House rule, quite a lot of them, but we often do meetings at Chatham House that are not under the rule, so it's definitely on the record. And we are very much looking forward to hearing from the people in this room, so many of you who have been involved with the internet from its very beginning, and who have been the engineers of the internet, and so many of you who have been involved in the policy of the internet and understanding the way the internet works with society. And it's bringing those people together in this forum today that we really want to do. So be as provocative as you can be. Perhaps I shouldn't say that to you. Be as creative as you can be. And I don't think I need to say that to you. And as constructive as you can be. And perhaps I do need to say that to some of you. So thank you very much. We really appreciate you all coming here. I can't thank the Internet Society enough for the collaboration and the spirit in which we've done this together. So Kathy, I'm handing the session over to you now, and I look forward to listening and learning. Thank you very much.
So in one's career, one meets so many fascinating people. Many of you are in the room who I've known for a very long time. Patricia is a relatively new companion, and we served together on the Commission on Internet Governance, which was a 2-year commitment, which I was the official observer of some sort, but in any event, we got to have a lot of conversations about the internet and this notion of governance, which all by itself we thought about. Can you really govern the internet? Or do you do governance on the internet or around the internet? Or who are we governing? Ourselves? Certainly not the technology, but you can imagine that kind of conversation. And this year, Patricia really, with such generosity, has offered us a place in this house, this home, this building, and also with her in their pursuit of intellectual rigor and exploration. And so we took this opportunity, full scale, your staff will tell you, and we asked whether this conversation couldn't be about the need for the technical community, the people who are still working on the code and the networks and the transport and all of it, to have a dialogue with those policymakers, civil society folks, academics, and deep thinkers around what we perceive to be some anxiety with respect to what we believe is one of the greatest innovations of humankind, the internet, that connects us place to place, people to people, continent to continent, culture to culture, in ways that when so many of us started, our great hope and inspiration was for a democratized world, a world where we could share cultures and grow and prosper together. And in so many ways, that has happened. But not for everyone, not yet, first of all. And secondly, some things popped up along the way, i.e. that the internet was actually a best efforts, very voluntary network of networks, and some security issues certainly did pop up when you start using it for all of the things we've managed to use it for. And we also find, like almost every other technology in the world, that if it can be used for good, it can also be used for bad. And so we feel this anxiety about what do we do now? And so that is why we're here. We are very delighted that all of you have joined us. Our rule one is we don't have the answer. We together have to create the answers. And so that's what we're going to do for the next couple of hours. And we've asked Erik to start off to provoke us a bit. He comes from the technical world, but he is also someone who could speak to the intersections of what I believe is going on today. So Erik, if you would take the podium.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And for years I've been sitting in meetings all around the world that were operated according to the Chatham House rule. And here I am finally in the Chatham House in a meeting that is not done according to the Chatham House rule. This kind of spoils the fun, doesn't it? But let me start with the Chatham House rule. The Chatham House rule says when a meeting or part thereof is held under the Chatham House rule, participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of speakers nor that of any other participant may be revealed. Let's keep that in mind, and let's then look at the Internet Society. The Internet Society's vision is Internet for everyone. Now let's try and combine the Chatham House rule with this vision from the Internet Society. The Chatham House rule is a simple rule that helps to make sure that in a physical meeting people can and speak open and freely. Part of it assures a sort of freedom of expression and freedom of information. It suggests transparency, easy access, things that are the foundation of the internet as we know it, and which are the main reason that the Internet Society as its mission has to promote the open development, evolution, and use of internet for the benefit of all people throughout the world. The Chatham House rule also suggests that the information has been debated and therefore has, I would say, some kind of legitimacy. But the other part of the Chatham House rule is about identity. And we all know that on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. But everyone can call you a bitch. In a physical meeting under the Chatham House rule, people value the anonymity and it encourages them to speak their minds. I've been in many meetings under the rule, and it really helps that people feel free to open up and be somewhat provocative, try to really say what's on their mind. There's no threat to doing that. Inside the meeting room, they feel protected by a moral, cultural code of conduct, and outside the room, they are not identifiable. Now, if we try to apply that to online, it doesn't work. There's no inside the room versus outside the room on the internet. You're either anonymous or you're not. If you're a journalist working in a country with a repressive regime, and there seem to be more and more of those, starting even with not letting your press attend a press conference of your president, you value anonymity in this case. Anonymity is your friend. Tor is your friend. If you're not anonymous, if you're identifiable on the internet, and you try to express your opinion, more often than not, you risk trolling, hate mails, threats, even fake news about you. Online, there is no moral or cultural code that guards the way that people behave. Let's think a little bit more about this social behavior. In the physical world, there are social rules. These are determined by customs which in turn are formed by culture. And culture is usually rather local. The internet is not local. On the contrary, it's by definition and design global. So somehow, we therefore end up on the internet with the least common denominator in terms of behavior. In the physical world, if we're in a debate, a discussion, and we get a little bit agitated, you might get support from one or two people. But if the rest of the room stays silent, the silent majority has an influence on you. It curbs your behavior. It forces you to tone down. It doesn't encourage you to go up and be even more aggressive or more absurd in your in what you want to say. We don't see the silent majority online. They are there, but you can't see them. So there's nothing there to curb your behavior. There's nothing there to hold you back. You can be as extreme as you like. And especially if you react or act anonymously, people tend to go overboard every now and then. So on the internet, if you apply the Chatham House rule, all people contribute anonymously, and any debate, therefore, will probably quickly spin out of control. In the technical community, we saw this already way back. If I focus on the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which sets the major standards for the internet, and we look back in history, it started out with all white male Americans. And all white male Americans have a specific culture in dealing with one another. Can be pretty rough, pretty offensive, not as offensive as the orange guy, but pretty offensive. But the IETF wanted more diversity. They realized the internet is global, we need to involve other cultures. So the IETF opened up and invited people from every region, every part of the world to participate in defining and setting the standards. And to do that, we had to provide guidelines on the behavior. Back in 1994, Dave Crocker and I edited an RFC, a request for comment. That's the publication mechanism of the IETF. RFC 1603, where we defined the guidelines on behavior in the community. Later on, the IETF added guidelines for conduct in 2001. And now it even has an RFC describing an IETF with much diversity and professional conduct, which was published in 2015. All this is made possible because in the IETF, while you have different cultures and you have people from different regions, they have a clear focus. The focus is we want to improve the technology, we want to make the internet better. And there's also an incredible willingness to work together. So it's a relatively easy environment to apply codes of conduct and social rules. Unfortunately, on the internet at large, it is not that easy. But at least we as techies, we came to understand that behavior is something that we need to work on in the internet. And where we can contribute with technology, we will, but we also realize this is something you can't solve with technology alone. The extreme behavior we're seeing nowadays on the internet is, of course, really worrisome. And if a regulator in any country tries to act against extreme behavior on the internet, he or she is quickly faced with accusations of limiting the freedom of speech. Lots and lots of people confuse freedom of speech with the fact that anybody needs to just take your opinion, which is, of course, quite something different. As a consequence, I see more and more people resort in online debates to no longer expressing their opinions for fear of being confronted by extreme behavior. And I think that self-censorship is one of the worst things that can happen to freedom. On the internet, it seems that fear is trumping trust. Fear of extreme behavior, but also fear of cybercriminality, fear of the big companies that assemble all kinds of data and information about us on the various platforms we interact through, fear of technology maybe even, and certainly also fear of governments. Governments that start using mass surveillance, assuming we are all guilty unless proven otherwise. And I never understand how that even works in something we call a democracy. Can we resort to the law to curb extreme behavior? No, we can't. Laws are national and not of much help in this respect. What is allowed in the Caliphate, for example, videos of beheadings, is not allowed under law in several other countries. What is allowed in France, take nude pictures, is not allowed in the US. Very few countries have laws that agree on what and what is not extreme behavior. I think the only exception is child pornography, where every country in the world has the same rules. But on anything else, laws differ and are not usable for this. So what are the consequences? The civil debate, according to a Chatham House rule, is hardly possible online. This leads to an extreme online behavior in debates, which in turn leads to self-censorship and ignoring the silent majority. Trolling, fake news are growing in size and in strategical importance. They are not only used towards individuals, but also against organizations, politics, and states. The current debate going on in the US about the elections is a clear example of that. But the same happens in other countries. Populism is on the rise because of this. People lock themselves up in their filter bubbles, thus exacerbating the problem. It endangers democracy, it endangers freedom, and it certainly endangers the internet. So, the internet for everyone, but does everyone still want the internet? I hope they do. And I still think that the positive aspects that we bring with the internet outweigh all these negative things. And like Kathy already said, in the beginning we thought the internet would be, doing much more. I remember the very first debates I had in the IETF, and we're talking late 80s, that we had this vision that the internet would allow everyone to communicate with everyone, and therefore everyone would understand everyone, and wars would be over. We had the solution to peace. Well, I was idealistic at that point in time. But still, what can technology do to help curb this problem? Can we capture norms for social behavior in protocols? Using filtering techniques, for example, to disallow words, phrases, to disallow moods. And do we want to do that? Do we want to apply filtering? Can we use the same techniques that we use for target advertising for targeting behavior? We can easily apply those techniques to assemble data on people's online behavior and analyze that and block access based on that behavior, or limit their online time, or limit their participation in discussions, etc. But again, do we want to do that? Those are questions I hope the panel will answer. We can use all kinds of blocking techniques for users to block unwanted content. You can block unwanted opinions, trolls. But do you want to do that? Because the moment you start blocking unwanted content, you're creating your own filter bubble. And the problem really gets worse because nobody knows about the opinion of somebody else. I worked for the public broadcaster for some time in the Netherlands, and I really, in the time before internet and certainly before YouTube, we had just the public broadcaster in the Netherlands. There was no commercial broadcaster yet, we had the public broadcaster. And so everybody in our society watched the public broadcaster, and the public broadcasters showed opinions from every part of society. So you were confronted with different opinions every evening. And you learned, in my view, to deal with the fact that your opinion is not a unique opinion, there's others, and that you have to compromise. Nowadays, nobody watches public television anymore. And so you can create your own filter bubble. You don't have to know that there's people who have other needs, who have other demands, who have other wishes, other ideals. We can track who reads discussions with technology. And we can use that information to calculate and show how big the silent majority is in any forum. Would that work? And do we want to do that? Do we want to track people? Or do we want to declare technology and technologists to be content unaware and therefore neutral and therefore have no role whatsoever in solving these problems? Well, if we do that, we start to sound like the NRA, in my view, and we shouldn't do that. Technology cannot solve the problems I described. However, the problems I described cannot be solved without technology. And therefore, today's debate is necessary now more than ever. Thank you very much.
So I asked Erik to provoke, and he certainly has. I think there's a number of statements that we could take up in and of themselves, but perhaps the most important thing is to deal with this idea of fear. Because I heard that word a lot, did I not? And I think it's because it reflects some things we're hearing in our worlds, in all of our worlds. I want to, I'll say this, and then I'm going to introduce this esteemed panel. To combat fear, we have to go through it, not around it. So that's what we're going to try to do here, okay? So this wonderful panel. James Arroyo is the close member and colleague of Chatham House. He is the director of the Ndili Foundation and has a long and distinguished career in the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And I know he's going to bring some key insights and has a real specialty in the security area. Dr. Unoma, I have to get your, I always get your Nigerian last name wrong, so let me try it. Okarafor, not bad, huh? Is just a wonderful colleague that I met when she received the GemTech Award for the work she is doing in educating girls in Africa. She herself is a Ph.D. Computer scientist and engineer. She is an esteemed colleague who I think brings much to the table on what the future ought to look like. Here, Dr. Shah is a very valued partner for the Internet Society and the people of the Internet Society in Pakistan. He is the chair of the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority there. He has been a key collaborator in a stakeholder conversation that we have been having in Pakistan. He's a very forward thinker and is champion for digital accessibility issues. Even last night over dinner, that was at the top of his mind. So he brings this to the table. Rebecca MacKinnon directs the Ranking Digital Rights Project at New America. This project is interesting. She, in the private sector, as a member of civil society, ranks companies, internet companies, for user privacy and for their freedom of expression. 22 countries, you might take a look at the website, it's quite fascinating. Over 35 indicators. One of the things that Erik raised and that I think we want to address is this idea of norms. I hope we'll get to that, but there's different perspectives right at this table. I thought, let's take up the fear thing right away. I thought if each of you would just talk a little bit about where you sit in the ecosystem and where you stand on the hope for the internet's future and the fear that we just heard about. So, James.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I spent quite a long time trying to transform a part of government to take account of the rise of the internet and the growing importance of data. And I left that to go and run the Ndili Foundation, in part also because of the internet. And what I wanted to go to Ndili for was to have a space and place to try and think about the redefinition and renewal of the West. For example, whether we still wanted to call it the West and whether that made any sense in an interconnected age, in the digital age. And I think that's an important project for some of the things I was just going to bring out on my fears. Firstly, I think the internet has an interesting co-history with the end of history from 1990 onwards. And that was about westernization, which we mistook for globalization. And now we're in, because it was the triumph of the West. And now we're into a globalized world, and it's much more neutral. That's and that's an opportunity, but it's also a fear. That's linked to me for something else I want to throw out, which is there's a huge opportunity in what the internet does about collapsing place. And that's new, and that hasn't happened before. The way that you used to operate different systems, different value systems, was one was over there, when in Rome you did as the Romans were, and another one was over here. And that's not true anymore. Here is there, and that's happening now. And the trend of that is going to get ever more powerful, which I think, again, is both an opportunity and a huge fear for me, which is that as telepresence gets more and more powerful and more realistic, our ability to hold systems separate, value systems, is made more difficult. I think another trend, which for me, again, is an opportunity of fear, I can't separate them out, is that we are increasingly encoding our values into algorithms, as Erik kind of flicked at. So we're making machines where the values are not held by the operator as they were in the past. That's one of the differences about the technology. But where the values are encoded into the very machine itself by the makers. And this reaches its kind of zenith with autonomy and AI, obviously, but it's already here now in machine learning biases. I think Kathy touched on security. Values are also encoded into security. And I think that's the challenge on security, is how do you have a distributed system that is secure when security in itself is a value judgment? So I think we have to try and push through this to get to some norms, but I don't think we should underestimate the challenge. And people use earlier examples, including me, like, new territories opened up, like by the East India Company and how that got normalized, and then the law of the sea. But I think this collapse of place is a genuinely hard problem and a new thing in human organization. And I'm fearful of just how difficult that is.
Very good. So, Unoma, where do you sit in this world ecosystem?
So good afternoon, everybody. It's a joy and an honor to be here. And for me, I think that it is true that the internet is here for everyone. It hasn't quite happened for all. I speak as an African woman, and I want to represent sort of the view coming from emerging economies, but especially for women. So we are having conversations around the digital divide. And one of my big fears is that that divide is getting even wider across gender lines. If we take some statistics, for example, 50% less women are likely or have the means to get online to access some of the benefits that the internet has to offer. And so I fear the rise of the second digital divide, not just across economic lines, but especially across gender lines. And so part of what I worry about is how we bridge that digital divide. I think that technology and access to the internet is particularly essential for the empowerment of women. So the internet is a powerful tool and can be used for good things around access to financial tools, access to global markets, increasing the opportunity for education for people across the globe. And so part of what we think about is how can we provide technology skills and trainings, especially for women across the globe, but in the part of the world where I come from, so that they are able to access the internet in a way that is valuable to them. So we have to think about skills training, especially as women are increasingly accessing the internet through mobile devices. But also we are thinking about the content that we are accessing through the internet and worrying about localizing content and not just being consumers of content. And so that we don't also experience cultural changes in shocking ways. We make sure that the culture of the local people is being preserved while accessing this amazing global network called the internet. So those are some of the things we talk about. But also there's things around job security. So the internet and technology is making it possible for everybody sort of to go after what the opportunities are. And if you think about it, according to statistics, about 90% of the jobs that will be created over the next decade or so will require some sort of technological skills. And so how do we prepare young people, especially thinking that Africa will have the greatest number, will be the youngest continent in the next 10 to 15 years. So how are we engaging with the youth to make sure that they are able to access the jobs, especially as we talk about artificial intelligence coming to take over some of the lower paying jobs, a lot of our young people are going to be out of jobs. So how do we certainly look at those sort of issues? And then we also talk about things around security, and security can mean different things to different people. So I would take an example of a case that happened recently in Cameroon, where the government shut down sort of half the internet for the Anglo-speaking, the English-speaking part of that country. And their reasoning was they are sort of securing their borders, and they don't wanted to shut down free speech, which they thought was a political advantage to them. So we think about those kinds of issues versus I just came from Rwanda a few days ago, where the government is also really trying to restrict what goes out on the internet because they are coming from a history of genocide, where the internet can be used to sort of disseminate a lot of hate messages that can really quickly degenerate into anarchy and violence. But when you even extend this to women, we are talking about violence against women, stalking that happens in particular to women, and how we make sure that the internet is delivering content or perhaps sanitizing content before it gets to young children and women, and how this impacts our communities and our cultures. And then, of course, the thing around fake news is really important, but not just fake news. If you extend that idea, that now we can talk about fake everything, fake personalities and fake companies and fake entities, and if you're doing business across the globe, how this might impact our societies. And so it's a myriad of things. When you talk about some of the fears, I think that the internet has the potential to really bring a lot of exposure and connect women to global markets. But there's a lot of concern around some of these issues that I talked about.
Thank you, Unoma. Dr. Shah.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank ISOC and Chatham House for the invitation. Now, as pointed out by the earlier speaker, where do I sit? I sit in the middle, I would say, between the government and the private sector. But before I talk about that, let me just mention that actually Pakistan has been going through a revolution in the ICT sector, information communication technology sector, and I'll just talk about that in a minute. And you have really to come there to see it, or we can actually give you even a virtual tour if you want. But things are happening in Pakistan. Although internet was there since the 90s, but the real change that has happened is because of the mobile internet in the last few years. Before that, as a telecom regulator, my job was very easy. Actually, I wasn't there, but the predecessor's job was very easy. There was these spectrum that they would give out, and the companies would buy that and provide voice connectivity. And that was the basic role, and you had to, as a regulator, make sure that the quality of service is good and things are working fine. But once we had the internet, and let me tell you, before when I joined in 2013, we had 3.79 million broadband connections. And as soon as we had the mobile broadband technologies, both 3G and 4G technologies, now that number stands at 43 million. So from 3.79 million 3 years ago, we are now at 43 million. So you can see how much change it would have brought in the society, and at the same time made my job very, very difficult. I really liked the earlier speaker when he talked about the regulator being accused of many things. Well, many of those things are not right, but that's beside the point. The way I see internet is that I see it as an enabling technology. So our first priority issue is to bring people in on internet. We want to bring them on internet, and the easiest way to do that is through your cell phones. your mobile phone, and that is with experience throughout the world. So once they are on the internet, what we are now trying to concentrate on are new services. Actually, the young people, Pakistan is a young country. Our mean age is about 25 years. And they are finding new things, new services, new ideas, new ways of employment. Graduates now are actually not going and trying to find jobs. Of course they are, but a big majority of them are now becoming entrepreneurs. They are working using the internet. They're working for some company that they probably didn't even know of in the past. They are creating their own content. I happened to attend a seminar that was arranged by the UN in Pakistan, and they had a young person sitting on the panel, and the moderator asked him, "So what do you do?" He said, "Well, I create content and that goes viral." That's what he does. So basically, these are the kind of things that are happening. Financial inclusion through the internet has increased tremendously. In fact, now we have a vision that by 2020, we would like to have 50% of the adult population have a bank account. And that has been made easy by the regulations that we have. So in that sense, we have, I believe, worked quite well with the State Bank of Pakistan and the other authorities. There are issues also. For example, if you look at just the connectivity part, as we just heard, the digital divide is not only across people who are connected or not connected in the physical sense. So it's not just because depends on the region where you are. Let's say you don't have connectivity or you have connectivity. It is across gender also. So we don't have enough female, for example. We don't have enough people with disabilities, which is a topic very close to my heart, on the internet. And slowly and gradually, we also have another kind of disconnect, and that's going to connectivity issue or digital divide. That's probably going to increase, and that is the skill set. People don't have enough skill sets to actually use the internet effectively. So far, our organization as an authority, and just to put things in perspective, we are kind of the equivalent of Ofcom here. We're mainly, as I said, concerned with connectivity. Content was not an issue for us because we were not dealing with that. But somehow, it is now coming to us. And we have to deal with it because the society, as I said, with the rapid growth from 3.79 million to 43 million broadband users or internet users, things have changed a lot. Now everything is kind of thrown towards us. And what we are seeing is that the physical world is becoming to be the cyber world is becoming a little difficult, very difficult as compared to the physical world from the content point of view. What is happening is that everyone would like to use the internet, but when they run into problem, they say, okay, so whom should we go to? And then they come to us. And in most cases, actually I would say we don't have the answers. And it's my own organization's ability also to deal with these kind of issues that we have to work on also. However, I am optimistic. I think if you look at the history, look at all the technologies, look at for example, the printing press, people at that time were opposed to that. Television, people were opposed to that. Radio, people were opposed to that. Now we have the internet, which is the fastest growing technology of the human history. There will be some issues, but I'm a firm believer that the advantages outweighs the disadvantages by a big, big margin. All these issues, all the questions that they were raised, we will eventually find the answers, or we may not be able to find the answer, the exact answer, the right answer, but with a multi-stakeholder approach that we are now moving into, at least in our organization. So I say even the public, you are also, or the citizens of the country, of the world, are also now part of the regulatory process, so to say. As far as we are concerned, I'm We are trying to unregulate. We try not to be the regulator. We try to be the facilitator. So that's what we have.
Thank you so much. Rebecca, perhaps a word or two about this privacy issue.
Sure. Well, listening to Erik's very wise remarks, I'm actually going to kind of back out even further and dust off an argument I made in a book that I published 5 years ago called Consent of the Networked, in which one thing that really struck me about Erik's remarks is sort of our challenge in governance. We don't have the right kinds of governance structures to really address the problems we're facing. And I've made the argument in the past that in a way we've hit a moment that the world was in when the Magna Carta was published. And I'm not talking about the need for yet another charter or Bill of Rights. We've got Net Mundial principles. We've got the 13 principles for surveillance and human rights. We've got all kinds of treatises and declarations and lists of rights and principles. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fact that the parallel that around the time of the Magna Carta, there was coming to be a realization that the system of governance that everyone assumed was the only possible system of governance, the divine right of kings, was no longer fit for purpose. And I think we're now realizing that sort of nation state based on kind of nation state rule of law and democratic governance, while I do believe in democracy, I do believe in human rights very deeply, and we'll talk about that more, but our existing governance structures, both for national governance, international governance, and corporate governance, are not fit for purpose to deal with the issues we're facing. And the question, I think, really is, how do we develop, support, and sustain an internet that will sustain the kind of society we want to have for our children and grandchildren? And right now, the incentive structures, I think, around regulation at the national level, and also sort of the way in which corporations tend to be driven, the incentive structures, is not leading us in the direction we want to go. And so I think that the Internet Society, Chatham House, many of the other institutions represented in the room are in a great position to help us begin to think, to bring together the stakeholders, the technical community, the business community, regulators, policymakers, civil society, to really think about how do we address these problems. And so I also don't think it's going to be some kind of grand plan, top-down thing that we're just going to suddenly innovate, or somebody's going to come up with a brilliant idea. The next global governance structure is X. I think it's going to evolve very organically in a very internet-y way. Right? And so I think many of the people in the room are involved with efforts that are trying to get at different pieces of how do you hold power accountable in a digitally networked world? How do you ensure that human rights are respected and protected, and that everyone using the internet can exercise their rights, whether they're female, whether they're a religious minority, whether they're underage, whoever they are? And how do we hold abuse accountable, and also fight crime and keep people physically secure as they have a right to be? These are really tough questions. And so the project I'm doing now, and I'll stop talking, we can get to the discussion, is one effort to kind of look at a piece of that, which is, okay, for companies, how do we incentivize companies to contribute to the kind of internet we want for future generations? What are some of the principles and standards we want companies to adhere to beyond just maximizing the bottom line for their shareholders? And that includes human rights. We've got the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. We've got a number of principles that have come together. And so how do we develop a set of standards to benchmark companies just on two rights, freedom of expression and privacy? And so how do we build sort of a system for companies to make commitments, to assess whether they've made the right kinds of commitments, and to try and provide some tools and some data, both for policymakers and for civil society and for companies themselves and for investors, to have a conversation about what kind of internet we want, if we want to have a society in which power can be held accountable, in which an investigative journalist can communicate with sources without ending up dead in a ditch, in which young people can talk to one another about their religious ideas that are perhaps immature and unformed without being attacked, or just make friends, that kind of world. It's not going to be easy, but we need to figure out really what are the accountability mechanisms, what are the principles, and what are the norms that can protect these rights. How do we get governments also, when thinking about regulation, recognizing that they're part of a broader global system? Not just accountable, frankly, on the internet, you're not just accountable to your own citizens because you're affecting everybody throughout the entire network. And how do we build more accountability, more impact assessment, one might say, into the decisions that are being made and the rules that are being set and the design choices that are being made. So I'll just kind of throw that out and
Thank you,
we'll take
Rebecca.
it from there.
So let me serve the role of realistic optimist. And let me point out what I think I just heard and what we've also in the Internet Society discovered through about 2,100 interviews that we have done in our community, which is all around the world. And we spent about 1.5 years talking to people from everywhere. This conversation, where are you? Are you scared? Are you happy? Is there opportunity? Is it all done? What's the issue? And we find a startling thing that you just saw play out here. The developing markets are still pretty optimistic. They're saying, please, we want this. This is the backbone of the global economy. One person's loss of place is another person's open market. One person's clash with culture, but you've changed everything I ever believed, is another person's opportunity for innovation and growth. One group of technologists who feel put upon and we tried so hard, how could this be, are a group of 25-year-olds who I meet in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, who say, we're the engine of growth for the world. Stop it. We don't care about it. We're going to do this internet ourselves. I see Africans standing up and saying, Africa, the internet for Africa, Africa for Africans. I see Europeans, Americans saying, hey, what a mess we have. What did we do? We have all this commercialization and we have this overwhelming sense of fear and a real problem around security. What is the kind of threads that go through all this, though? There's a couple of themes that I think we all globally come around. One is the safety issue. One is safety. Now, it gets played out in a security way so that one person's shut down half my country to keep me safe from internal conflict is another, I need to shut down some of this stuff because it results in genocide. I know all about that. Europe knows all about hate language. The Americans and the Europeans could never understand each other's privacy principles, and one has to understand history to understand why the cultures are different around these issues. And if you don't understand the history of a people, you don't understand why security, privacy has different flavors, right? So Erik said that the internet is not local, it's global. And I'm going to take him up on that. It is both. And all you need to do is go around and speak to people who want to use a useful tool, right? It's supposed to be for general purpose, is what we say about the internet. It's for general purpose. Well, that general purpose is both local and global. And so then you get to these governance issues. So then what? When you are moving information, data, and people around the world the way we are. So why don't we take up, what do we do? Can we take up this local global dichotomy? Because I think we have to unpack it a little bit to get to the, how do we govern that? If it's not the nation state, what is it? I'm going to let the panel go one more round, and then I'm going to go out to all of you that are dying to say something, okay? One more round with the panel, okay? Who would like to go first? Dr. Shah, go ahead.
Well, as I said, I'm very optimistic about the future of internet and the things that it can do for our community, at least locally and I think globally also. On the way to this place from our hotel, there was traffic jam, and we had discussions with Dr. Unoma. And one of the things that very is close to that she is working on, which is to decrease the digital divide among the women, or to bring more women to get to use the internet. Well, the thing that we discussed was that, okay, yeah, you have certain global things, but then you have some local environment also. And I'll give an example from my culture. In Pakistan, one of the things that we see, the fact that we have seen, is that when you go to a medical college, medical university, you will see 70% of the students would be girls. But when you go to a hospital, they will be probably 20%, 30%. So where does the rest of them go?
Where did they go?
They get married and stay home. Okay, so now what? Should we just get them out of the home? Well, it may not be possible. They just choose not to work, or maybe it's culturally difficult. So take work to them. So there are different programs that are based on health, e-health or remote health provision. And again, there is another cultural issue where the female patients would only like to be seen by a female doctor. So you solve the two problems. You bring the females to the e-clinic, and they are seen by a female doctor who otherwise is just sitting at home, not doing the professional work. So this is just one example. You work through the culture and use of technology. So this is a technology that you're using to bring in the people, the girls in this particular case, into the workforce. And slowly and gradually, what I believe is that this will also bring about a change, an overall change. Similarly, education. Let's say you don't have a university close to your home, a good college close to your home. The technology can help you in that. In fact, in Pakistan, we have one of the world's largest virtual university that is working since 2002. And you can actually enroll in that, and you get a regular degree. You just have to go for the exam to a central place. So I believe that local versus global, these are some of the localized things that you are able to do using the global internet. But if you try to force people and say, okay, this is the way you must act, probably it will not be acceptable, at least to begin with. Slowly, with the passage of time, when we have enough awareness, enough education, that will also happen. But at least we need to start from somewhere.
Who else would like to speak?
I can go, I think. I think we're going to pass through a difficult phase with this, and actually the priority is increasingly going to be to just keep the train tracks in place and not get them torn up. And what I mean by that analogy is the connectivity of the basic network. I buy into everything Rebecca said about, rating people on freedom of expression and privacy, but that is an explicitly Western values-driven agenda. And states that don't buy into that are going to push back on that and view it as a direct challenge and threat. And they're going to do that more and more rather than less. So I think we are already seeing the cantons developing of the internet, where people are pushing back on that local and global mix. And I think that trend is just going to deepen and deepen. over time, I agree with Syed that that the internet is a huge advantage for gradual change, but it's going to take time, and that the quick change is going to be resisted.
Let me ask you this, however. If the way we express our values in some sort of law is Western or Eastern or Southern or Northern, are there a set of values, however, that go across the internet globally that when we all come together, we seem to say, yeah, but I want to hear from you?
So in part of the work that we do, we are now exploring what we call the global classrooms. Is one of the projects that we are working on in my organization. And this is a concept where we are trying to connect classrooms across the Western world with classrooms, say, in Africa. And the teachers sort of run a project together for a few weeks. And it could be a project as diverse as what does it mean to be an empowered woman, to something like web development. And students talk across each other. And so that's a way where we're sort of using the internet to sort of understand what culturally these things mean. And we've seen some interesting examples where, for example, what it means to be empowered to a young girl sitting in a city like Lagos, Nigeria, is quite different for another girl in the US. But I think that the internet sort of facilitates these global classrooms, and by the time they spend 5 or 6 weeks talking to each other in a controlled environment, there's a lot of learning. So I think that the internet can be used to, in a controlled way, to sort of help other people to understand what the globe looks like for somebody like them. There's certainly similarities and cultures that are, there's the underlying basic similarities that people want to be educated, they want to be knowledgeable, they are aware of what their rights should be, and they have an understanding of what the power of internet could do. So there is that sort of, I think that there's a lot that can be shared that we can leverage rather than sort of hamper. And perhaps what we should be talking about should be more about how do we learn what these sort of commonalities are and empower that across the internet.
So Rebecca, are there attributes of the internet properties that actually go to some universal values?
Well, you know, human rights, there's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, free expression, Article 12 deals with privacy. And I would push back a little bit that nobody other than Westerners cares about these values. In our Corporate Accountability Index, actually one of the companies that does very well is Kakao from South Korea, where both civil society and political system have been pushing for companies to respect user rights. So I'd push back a little in that sense. And I'd push back in that we've been hearing since we started this project from people on every single continent who want to use our methodology to evaluate companies in their countries. And so even if their governments aren't interested in having people do this, there are lots of people, humans, members of society, who find this quite important and believe there needs to be greater emphasis on these things and believe that this is in their interest. And I would just finally say the most powerful case that I've ever heard made for freedom of expression came from a Zimbabwean journalist and activist, Tarai Maduna, who said, if I don't have freedom of speech, I can't talk about who's stealing my food. So, you know, I think this is not just a Western value. I think, you know, more broadly, we're seeing movements for accountability, for resource accountability, for basic competent economic governance all over the world. And without freedom of expression, without the ability to organize privately, without being under constant surveillance, you cannot improve governance in Africa. You cannot improve governance in Central Asia. So and this is where I'm saying the nation-state governance system is somewhat unfit for purpose, in that these nation-states that are pushing back against these values are actually not representing and serving their own people's rights very well. I'm not saying that Westerners should come in on as knights in shining armor on white horses. I'm saying that people in these regions and countries need to be empowered to better articulate their needs and have governance that is more accountable to them.
I think, if I can add to that, just what Rebecca said, I think that that's a really important point you made, that the people actually are trying to use the internet as tools for advocacy or change and to have their voices heard. And I think of an example with the recent girls who were kidnapped by the Boko Haram group, and how women and young people use the internet and the social media to create the Bring Back Our Girls campaign that sort of brought international visibility to this issue. In spite of the government trying to sort of suppress any kind of news that was getting out. So I think that there are issues that certainly human rights and the rights of women that is sort of cuts across the internet.
I will add to that, and I'll see if there's others who want to pick up a thread. But the same zeal for human rights is there for economic growth.
That's
So
right.
I wish people could walk around the world with me and see the innovation that is going on because of this connectivity and because of the thinking that we can use this to do new things in ways that are quite new. They're quite new. All right, look at this. You ready, everyone? Okay, this fellow, I have to go in the back because you've been really trying.
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Dave Marcel. I'm treasurer of a group called DevSecOps in the BCS.
Could you speak a little
Hello,
louder?
my name's David Marcel. I'm the treasurer for the DevSecOps group of the BCS. I'd just like to say that... Thank you for the intro.
This is our friend Vigilio.
My journey began in 1969 from a Bletchley Park wren teaching me computing, about the same time the internet was first working. And my main hero of the internet when I started working, the first book I got delivered to where I was in Sarajevo was Internet Routers and Bridges by Radia Perlman, without whom we would not have the spanning tree algorithm. And her career has been one of the hidden heroes of the internet, gone on through Intel to Dell. Question for the panel, something that perhaps makes Dr. Shah's easy is the ability installed in every Intel motherboard called the management engine. It's been revealed as a vulnerability this week, but Black Hat have been presenting it for about 10 years now. So, Rebecca, our first charter, if it affects my beer, I get upset, and our first charter of beer was Magna Carta, and the global value in there is that there shall be but one measure of beer, wheat, and corn, that being the London Quarter. And that is an international value whether you drink beer or not. So, challenge for the panel, have we reduced our internet because of this management engine and equivalents in other areas which spy on you, creating a W3C compatible DRM lock on everything you do, making Dr. Shah's work easy on every one of your Intel motherboards? Please Google the ME for Intel. Have we made a rod for our own backs and gone back a bit with this tiny little IoT engine of about the power of my first DNS system on the internet circa 1996? Thank you.
I'm not sure one of us can do that, so I'll take it, but we got people in the room who can, so we'll come back to this. John.
I'd like to
introduce yourself, please.
Jonathan
Or,
Taplin.
I think that's okay. We're doing identities here, right?
Okay. I'm the director of the Annenberg Innovation Lab at the University of Southern California. I want to tie two things. One that Erik said, which was this question of extreme behavior, and what Rebecca said about corporate accountability. And to me, the elephant in the room is that the vast majority of extreme behavior is put forth over two platforms run by the largest firms in the world, Google and Facebook. and they have the largest audience, 2 billion on Facebook, probably at least 2 billion on Google. And we probably know that if we could find some norms that Kathy was looking about, like, for instance, is it okay to have a beheading video from ISIS on YouTube, or is it okay for someone to kill someone live on Facebook Live? If we could reach some notion, I think we all agree that there are certainly technological measures that could filter that stuff. In other words, both those platforms use AI to filter pornography off their platforms. They have made that decision that that's out. And the strange thing in terms of corporate accountability is that it is only when advertisers came to them and said, I don't really like my advertisement on the front of this ISIS beheading video, that they began to do something about it. For years, we talked about this at the lab, and there were 40,000 ISIS videos on YouTube last year, and they did nothing about it. So it's only when advertisers say, I don't really like my paper towel ad on the front of this, beheading video, that they decided they would do something. So, I mean, that's the question for me. How does corporate accountability and extreme behavior jive with those two firms?
I would say user demand. I have a question. I have someone in the back, and I'm going to let 1, 2, 3 questions have, and then come back up here. Okay? Please go ahead.
My name is Pradeep Gupta. I'm from India chapter of Internet Society. Hello, I'm Pradeep Gupta. I'm from India chapter of Internet Society. I have a question. See, Internet has given liberty to each one of us, but now, as Rebecca said, now a time has come when the governance issue should be seriously discussed. So, should we create a society or a regulatory body which can take care of the issues on global as well as on local level, and all the governments of countries should be agreed on certain basic principles for allowing freedom?
Okay.
Anybody on the panel? None.
I will take a couple more. I see Yari. Do you want to say something? And then we're going to come back up here, and then I'll go to you, Mike.
So my name is Jari Arkko. I'm with Ericsson Research, and was thinking about the setup for this panel, and I think it was framed mostly from the point of view of news and social media and sort of keeping societies together and avoiding division and fear. But I would like to actually call for broadening the discussion just a little bit, because I think the situation and issues are very different depending on what aspect we're looking at, and not to minimize in any way the important things in that part that the setup was. That's hugely important. But the other areas that I just wanted to touch on, so to begin with, the human interaction is not just the public sphere, it's also many other things, communities working together on projects, friends connecting, and the issues in that communication are very different from, say, social media fights on some political thing or some such. And secondly, I think we need to keep in mind also the difference between tech and human aspects. At the very least, you'd hope the tech that does allow us connecting all together, and then it's up to the humans to decide, I don't want to talk to you. But even the tech part is not quite there. So we're quite far there, but not totally there. As an example, the Internet Architecture Board was last year considering this issue of Internet of Things devices not being able to talk to each other at the application level. And of course, there's also some business and market issues, as you can imagine, both in this IoT case and many other topics. So I would like to ask that we look at the full spectrum of communications and also the tech issues and the market and business aspects.
Mike, and then I'm going to come back here, so all of you get ready. Okay.
I'm Mike Nelson. I do public policy issues for Cloudflare in Washington, D.C. A one-word question, China. More internet users than anywhere in the world, and they certainly are trying to shape the internet both inside China and around the world.
So Raul, go ahead, because I saw you say yes. Mimi.
My name is Raúl Echeverría. I work for the Internet Society. I I like it very much, all the interventions, but especially what Rebecca said about the governments. This is something that people don't talk about very much, and I think that is a huge problem, that the governments have not evolved. It's enough for dealing with the current challenges. And for those of us who live under a democratic system, we think that this is the best thing that we have done, even despite of the fact that being far to be perfect. But the democracy has not evolved almost anything in the last 100 years. And economy has evolved, technology, science, and so I think this is something that we have to, if we want to really to be in good shape for dealing with all the other phases, this is something that we have to put our finger in. So thank you for raising the point.
Does someone here want to respond to something specifically? I see more anxious people in the audience as well. Rebecca.
Well, I could talk a bit about the corporate accountability question. One thing that we look at is whether companies are sufficiently transparent about their mechanisms for enforcing their terms of service and about the volume and nature of things that are being taken down. And you know, the answer is there's not much transparency there. There's much more transparency amongst those companies that are being transparent at all about what governments are requesting directly. And so that's one of the problems. But I guess I'd push back a little bit in terms of how well the companies are technically able to police content on their platforms. They've done a good job of child abuse images, which is a much more narrow piece than pornography writ large. I would say that they've actually done a bad job in the broader sense of pornography, however you define it. If you look at all the stories that have come out about, you know, breastfeeding pictures being censored, the young woman who was fleeing in napalm bombing being sent, you know, news and art and all kinds of things being censored by algorithms. So there's actually quite a lot of debate about sexual imagery and whether the companies are doing a good job. So I'll just kind of put that aside for a moment. But more generally, my own experience in dealing with the companies, and I believe they need to be accountable to the public interest, but I've also seen, because I work a lot with citizen journalists and activists and journalists who use the internet in ways that are quite risky to themselves and try, you know, and use social media a lot to try and get information out because their own media isn't really able to publish their work. And I've been seeing that since governments began to put more pressure on social media platforms to take down extremism and to take down hate speech, I've been hearing of more cases of activists and journalists sort of being collateral damage in this. And it kind of spans from really silly cases like women named ISIS getting their accounts deactivated to much more serious things where companies, because they're under so much pressure to remove things that get reported and don't have enough humans to kind of look at the context, you're seeing dissidents who are, you know, there's a Chinese dissident who the Chinese government, speaking of China, has kind of, you know, put an Interpol alert on, who had their Twitter account deactivated the other day, really due to an error on Twitter's part. But it's in part, I know, because Twitter is under so much pressure to kind of clean up their platform. So I think the companies aren't being honest enough and clear enough and having a frank enough conversation with enough stakeholders about what they can and cannot do technically, and you know what their human processes are and how we arrive at better solutions. They're starting to have that conversation on the margins around fake news in particular, but I think this is one area that ISOC might actually really be able to facilitate, because I think not all of these conversations can necessarily happen in public, but the way in which the debate about extremist content and hate speech is happening right now, I think is not going in a direction that's particularly helpful, and that there are going to be a lot of unintended consequences. And so we need solutions. The status quo is not acceptable for anybody, but I don't think there's a simple technical fix to it either. And I think the solution really needs to be a collective solution amongst a lot of different players, rather than just saying, okay, fix it, companies, tweak your algorithm and fix it. I don't think we're going to get in the right place.
I didn't mean to imply that. I meant that there's a combination of AI and humans.
Yeah, I'm sort of skeptical that we've actually got a solution that currently exists.
Okay, so
I think
can
it needs a lot more work.
So I think there's a lot more to be said here about this, but do you want to add another thread?
Well, I was going to pick up the one-word question on China, which I think is really interesting when it comes to this question of how you weave values into security and to systems. So Zimbabwe's okay because no one really cares about Mugabe, and so we're empowering someone against him. That's great, but the internet empowering people or provinces or the Dalai Lama against President Xi, that's a different question. And I think that and bigger stakes. And I think that the debate with China about values is really interesting because in many ways China is a rule of law power. A status quo power, and certainly I think view itself, I know there are some representatives here, would certainly view itself as a rule of law power, but it's a different interpretation which puts much more value on social responsibility and cohesion than it does on individual personal expression. And those things are now colliding, here is there, so we're now having that debate out on the internet in China, which is why Google had to leave. So I think this for me is going to be an aspect of how we work out the internet, an aspect of how we work out what it's like to live in a world where actually there are different interpretations of capitalism, but actually we're in the same system. We're working together, but we don't quite agree, which is not the same as being separated.
So here's our dilemma. We have about 5 more minutes in this room, and I see at least 5 hands up and a panel that really needs to wrap it up. So I'm going to ask your patience, those people who like to speak, and know that you're going to see these folks in the hallway and you're going to grab them, and that we have so much more to talk about. But I am going to ask the panel to sort of sum up, and I'm going to start by staying where I was for a moment. Hope, fear, future, past, place, world, local, global. We have some things to tackle, but I think we also have some values that we in this room who care so much about the internet might grab onto and start to think about that. I will give you one principle, and then I'm going to let you all finish. This principle that Olaf always reminds me of, subsidiarity. That is, we believe that you solve the problem closest to the place where it arises. So of course the African nations are saying, could we please have some of our own local content? Their problem is their culture, their own traditions that they want to use this tool for to do things with. Why isn't that fine? Now, what about the fact that the problem is I don't have a university sitting in this village, and with a simple website I can get to MIT. I've solved a problem differently. Already people on the internet are solving problems that way. So my last word is I'm with Rebecca. We don't have our governance models up to date, do we? Because you really need to solve the problem where it is and then solve the bigger problems where they arise as well. For that, I'm going to let you start, Rebecca, on this end, and we'll come down. And if you want to make your final statement, I promise that was mine. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, in the very long run, I'm optimistic, but I do think we're facing some challenging times. One final point I'd just like to make has to do with trust, which is another word that's come up a lot. And I think we've all got trust problems. Internet companies have trust problems. The media has trust. Why do we have the fake news problem? It's not just because of internet companies. Also, there's a lack of trust in media, right? We have erosion of trust in government. We have erosion of trust in most institutions. And so I think all of these institutions, or everyone who represents or works for these institutions, I think trust will be raised collectively. It's not going to be a zero-sum game of the internet gains trust and governments lose trust. I think governments will win by finding ways to gain trust, and that sort of everyone needs to figure this out together. So I think that's a common challenge, and perhaps is one kind of more particular issue in this question of governance, is how do we earn trust of our various constituents and communities that we're trying to serve.
That's a good softball to you, Dr. Shah.
Yeah. I am actually optimist both in the short term and in the long term. And all these problems that we see, these problems, the humanity had that, and humanity has evolved. And I believe just these two questions that were asked by Jonathan and by Mr. Gupta, these things will also evolve, and the technology would be there, and you just mentioned it yourself, the AI, where these kind of things would be used by these platforms, not to have the content that you mentioned, and they will start doing probably a better job, not getting rid of this content that you have. So I believe there slowly and gradually it's an evolutionary process. And coming to Rahul's question, the governments will also evolve. Although yes, they are slow in evolving, but they have to evolve. There is no choice for them. They have to. And eventually I believe that there will be some kind of norms that, as was mentioned, that we have a norm at least on child pornography. Maybe we'll have another one related to terrorism, another one related to something else, and so on. As you have in the physical world, you will have some norms that all of us collectively would be able to come up with. And ISOC, I think, is one of the organizations, and there are a few others also, who can actually work towards these norms, because these issues are real issues. I mean, this beheading video and all, these are real issues. These are there. This content is there. Fake news are there. Phenomena is there. And eventually, I believe, these platforms will evolve, the internet will evolve, the governments will evolve, and mainly the individual also would evolve. They will not have this false, they will be educated enough that they will be living dual lives, one in the physical world and the other one in the cyber world.
So I heard James say that when it comes to some of these issues, nobody cares about Zimbabwe, and but I do Mugabe,
not Zimbabwe. We care about Zimbabwe.
I apologize for that, but I think that increasingly the world will start to care about these emerging markets. And so I think that we have the opportunity to roll it out well, or sort of to see if we can do a better job across continents like Africa, who are still embracing the internet. There is a lot of excitement about the internet. Like Kathy said, Africans are out there saying, bring it on. Companies like Facebook and Google are rushing into Africa because there is a huge market and new people are getting connected to the internet. So where I sit, some of the things that we want to talk about is how can we build capacity for our African governments to understand, even from the beginning, what it means to regulate, what kinds of regulations need to be put in place to make sure that they are part of the discussion from the get-go. Even in things like IETF, where those standards are being made, where protocols are being defined, that the emerging economies are part of those discussions, so that we certainly are helping to shape how it rolls into our continent.
Well, I hope I'm going to escape being trolled by the entire population of Zimbabwe. I look forward to that. I'm hugely optimistic because I think in the long run things are getting better, and there's great possibilities for innovation and for development and for human growth from the internet. But I think we should be really, really worried. Previous leaps forward in human connectivity, for example, the railways, made the First World War possible by allowing us to get more troops into concentrations more quickly. The aircraft, we kind of upped our game a bit and did the Second World War in some. Of course, there are plenty of other reasons, but an enabling technology to enable new levels of destruction. So I think we need to remember that flip side of technologies as well as the opportunities.
You're right. Okay. So thank you. Thank you all. On that positive note, let me thank Patricia one more time for your hospitality. Thank you, Erik. You started us off with that sort of Erik feeling of, oh my goodness, we have so much to say. Thank you to each of you for coming, for your time, and thank you for this audience. You've had so many ideas that they fell over the side and we weren't going to get them to them all. So let's spend a little time and make sure we figure out how to keep the conversation going. Okay, thank you to the Internet Society and for the staff of Chatham House for putting this together. Thank you.